Hello, everyone. This is Brandon. I'm going to be the MC for today's webinar follow-up series. This is the February 11th, 2021 edition. We have some very exciting speakers today joining us, one of them being Justin Fear, who is the Senior Director Product Marketing at WANdisco. Tony Velchich is the Senior Director of Product Marketing for WANdisco. We also have Justin Fear from Darktrace. He'll be participating in the second portion of the presentation. He is the Director of Cyber Intelligence and Analytics. And like I said, the first speaker up is going to be Tony Velchich from WANdisco. Now, if you do have any questions for Tony, please enter that into the Q&A bar, and then following the presentation, I will be more than happy to read those out. Tony, if you're ready to take it away. Oh, and Tony, you're on mute.
Thank you. So Anand's not on yet, correct? I don't see him.
We might have a bit of a delay on him participating, but if you want
to... You know what? Yeah, let me reverse the order a little bit. He was going to go first, but I will, I'm assuming he's going to join in a little bit. So I'm going to cover kind of my portion, and then we'll go back. So let's try and reverse that order. All right. So, okay. So let me start here then. So thanks everyone for attending. Like I said, my name is Tony Velchich with WANdisco. What we wanted to, what we were covering today is really how do you, migrate to the cloud for cloud analytics, leveraging, Databricks and WANdisco. There's lots of reasons to be moving to the cloud these days. Anand will be covering more of that and why it's advantageous to kind of take those on-premises data lakes, which has been very costly to manage in your own, on-premises Hadoop environment, and migrate those and take advantage of all of the capabilities available with Databricks and a cloud environment where you have, on-demand elasticity and new capabilities for AI, machine learning, et cetera. What WANdisco focuses on is how to help you migrate that data and do so very cost effectively and minimizing any risks that you may have. So this slide here actually shows kind of the cost comparison of managing, 3 years worth of data or a 3-year cost comparison for managing, say, 1 petabyte of data in the cloud versus 1 data on premises. Is based off of information that we got leveraging the Azure and AWS calculators that are available on their site. And you can see kind of the cloud costs are really typically half that of managing that data on premises. But what about the migration costs and other costs for moving there? Typically what we see is organizations will establish a budget to for their migration projects that still enables them to get a significant cost savings. However, what we find, a lot of analysts that talk about kind of these migration projects and how the majority of those run over time and budget. You can see from the Bloor Group study that's shown on this slide that they say over 80% of data migration projects actually run over time and budget. And that can easily wipe out any potential savings. So really, how do you manage that risk? I mean, this is what we call the data migration gap at WANdisco, and it's really what we're focused on helping people solve. So let me define that a little bit further. What is the data migration gap really? It's really the challenge of how can organizations, migrate their petabytes of what's now become very business critical data without exceeding time and budget, and especially when that data is actively changing. So new data is being ingested, or existing data is being changed by the production applications. This really introduces a lot of complexity to the whole migration project. And oftentimes it gets addressed, or organizations try to address it by simply shutting down their production systems. And that simply introduces a lot of business disruption and really increases the risks and ultimately the costs associated with these migrations. So not an optimal approach. This slide really looks at some of these various migration approaches, right? And you can see how in the slide, this live data approach that we do with, go forward. These migration approaches, or that WANdisco was really, yeah, I think we both have control, so sorry about that. Let me finish my part, and then we'll go back, if that's okay. So anyway, yeah, it works. So what this slide shows basically is how WANdisco is uniquely positioned really in this upper right-hand quadrant to really be the only solution can very effectively handle both of those dimensions, right? Where you have any or huge amounts of data that you want to migrate, and really any amount of data change. The other approach is typically, like a lift and shift type of approach, or using transfer devices, are really intended to migrate static data, not changing data, not do that effectively. Or they can try an incremental copy approach, which requires really multiple passes of the source data. And depending on the level of change, what we see is organizations may never be able to fully catch up with all of the changes that are occurring. Otherwise, to build out the solutions further, they've become very resource intensive, right? Requiring lots of manual processes to reconcile the changes, or large development efforts to really build out solutions. So our recommendation really is to follow kind of this data first strategy when it comes to your cloud migrations, right? So don't just try to lift and shift everything, data and applications all at once. Migrate your data, begin to optimize your data for analytics with, solutions like Databricks, which Anand will talk about in a minute. And that becomes a much more risk-free and much more optimal way to migrate. And what our Live Data Migrator solution does is it really enables this self-service kind of automated Hadoop migration with zero business disruption, right? So we talk about really three key points, right? That it's immediate, live, and scalable, as shown on the slide here. So by immediate, again, one of our key goals is really to make it completely self-service. So very simple to deploy. The deployment can be done in minutes, and you can really then begin migration immediately. The solution is entirely non-intrusive. It requires zero changes to applications or your cluster or node configuration. So production systems are not impacted at all. It's live, right? So it follows this whole live data approach that I've been talking about, right? Where your data can continue to change on your production side and migrate over. So no impact there, right? Requires zero business disruption. It performs this complete and then continuous migration as ongoing changes occur. They get migrated over immediately. And then scalable, right? Like I talked about, handles really any scale of data, any amount of change without any data loss. In addition to migrating the data, say, to the cloud object storage, WANdisco provides these capabilities to actually migrate and replicate that data directly into the format that's used by Delta Lake tables on Databricks, right? So this includes your Hadoop data as well as the Hive metadata. The solution, again, ensures data reliability and 100% consistency, even in supporting kind of an active-active scenario. If you want to make changes, allow changes on both sides, that's available with their live data for Databricks product. And then again, changes are really replicated immediately. So talking a little bit about some customers, we've had numerous companies that migrate their HDFS data to the cloud. GoDaddy, who's quoted on this slide, is one good example. They have a very active 800 node Hadoop environment, that supports peak workloads of up to, say, I think 100,000 file changes per second. And while the organization has very deep technical expertise, rather than try and develop their own kind of migration solution, leveraging some of those existing tools, they opted to, or they found really that WANdisco provides them really the best approach to do the migration and allow their staff to focus on kind of the strategic optimization projects and other activities rather than focusing on the migration or trying to build that out. We've also had very positive feedback from the analyst community. You can see Merv Adrian from Gartner quoted here. This was actually, he was interviewed for a Tech Target article where this quote appeared, and Merv talked about how there's no other vendor that can move the petabytes of data without interrupting production or risk losing data. So maybe we can come back to this last slide. I mean, it's kind of the call to action. Anand, if we jump back to the beginning, I'll turn it over to you to cover this part, and then we can quickly jump to the last one. So Anand, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tony. And apologies to the team that I couldn't join. I'm not sure what happened there. Let's just get started right here. Thank you for covering that. I think we went to the other end of the presentation, which is how can you migrate fast? And the WANdisco solution is an amazing high-scale solution. We want to talk very quickly about why is Hadoop sort of an end-of-life technology, and the data warehouse, Databricks lakehouse architecture, and then quickly come back to the migration part, right? As you all know, Databricks raised a big round of $1 billion and reached a $28 billion valuation recently, a couple of weeks back. We have this wonderful lakehouse architecture, which is the promise and the true fulfillment of one collaborative platform for all your data types, structured, semi-structured, etc., that will sit on the data lake, either S3 or ADLS, or in the future GCP and other clouds. And the beauty of the lakehouse architecture is that it allows your data to stay there in that low-cost elastic storage, and then add a structured transaction layer going from bottom towards up. That gives you the performance and reliability. That's our Delta Lake. It's again open sourced with the Apache Linux Foundation. And the Delta engine is the set of engines. It actually looks like one, but it's specifically tuned engines for each of these different workloads on top. So there's high optimization and performance tuning done for BI and SQL workloads most recently. And then it's always been a great platform for data science and machine learning, and streaming analytics, of course, works very well. So overall, that's what you're landing to when you modernize your platform. And why should you modernize your platform? I think you all pretty much know that, but what we're hearing overall from customers is that the costs are rising of things like Hadoop and SAS and data warehouses. You're not able to keep up with the size and scale of data because you really need one platform to keep up with all data types and make decisions fast. And ML and AI is something that you really want to be a primary strategy going forward to get competitive advantage in addition to the BI and SQL. Now, what's happening on the cost front, right? I'm not sure if the slides are rendering well. It looks the content is a little shaken up here. But bottom line in this slide is that when we talk to customers, this is a sample of a customer that with about 156 nodes of Cloudera has a 3-year outlook. When we do the financial analysis, that's what we do. When we do a financial analysis, when you come to us and say, what is going to be a projected cost? And the avoided licensing, the licensing costs of the Hadoop software, the hardware cost, the administration cost, the data center costs. When you put all of that together, it becomes quite a bit of a burden. And when you look at the same workload on Databricks, it would cost you 4.9 million versus the 18.7, and these were actual numbers from a particular case that we did. So net savings, new value add over 3 years would be 13.8 million. but you'd have to take one quarter or so to actually do the migration. So you might have to have both technologies running at the same time, so that overall value is discounted by another $1 million there, and your net impact is 12.8 in terms of value add. And the happiness quotient of customers and data teams being able to get their job done faster has, of course, non-linear benefits. And there's a whole layer that is we're not talking about here, which is the new revenues, the new profits, the new use cases that can be done in addition to saving costs. And that's why Forrester actually said, look, you can save 47% from cost savings, 25% of data team increase, data team productivity increase, and 5% increase in revenue. And when you look at that 5% increase in revenue with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, that could be very, very large numbers. So examples of how people have done this, there are plenty of examples across companies, across geographies, across verticals that have done this, and the kind of use cases that they've done: supply chain, demand forecasting, predicting bakery food spoilage with 10 large Hadoop clusters. In each case, you would see that there is a very significant cost and value financial impact. There's also capacity and use case impact. There's productivity increase. So all of these are not just concepts; they are very, very real results and outcomes that people have got. Wanted to touch on that lakehouse paradigm again. Just wanted to, for those of you who are not familiar with our lakehouse vision, we're saying, look, initially on the left side, there were data warehouses. We're all familiar with that, right? There's a lot of different sources, ETL systems writing into data warehouses, and then you're consuming BI and reports. Great reliability, amazing systems, but they didn't scale. They couldn't accommodate different types of data. And then we moved to the data lake on the right side, where you got this elastic, an elastic storage and cheap compute mechanism, which is the Hadoop-based technology. But then you ended up having a lot of different systems and silos for different types of databases. You still had to continue the warehouse. So it became many sources of truth. The reliability was not there. So it became kind of a data swamp in many cases. So what you really want is the best of both worlds: the reliability and performance and low latency access, et cetera, of data warehouses. You want the scalability and cost of data lakes, and that's what the lake house is. You're moving together both those benefits, and you're eliminating the problems of each of those, and you got one system that you can access all your data from and run all your workloads. And for those of you who are looking at other technologies and see how this whole thing fits in, you can continue to work with your data lake and Delta Lake and Databricks on your favorite cloud as your central place where you can keep all the data and consume most of it. And for an optional BI, say serving layer, you could have a data warehouse with one of these options, or you could have other databases that could potentially you could write into, but you could still have a single source of truth where most of your 80% of your workloads are actually being processed in a very, very efficient way, right? So that's the story here. And when you're looking at migration, you want to reduce risks, you want to reduce costs, and we recommend a solution like WANdisco to actually move large amounts of data. Now, besides data, we also help you to do workloads and jobs, the security and governance model, and other tools and integrations. Often people are concerned about this migration because there's a lot of systems, there's a lot of users, there's a lot of moving parts. So that's why we bring you an expert team. We have a specific SWAT team that are full of Hadoop experts that come and work with you and lead a full-fledged workshop that we will work with you on. It's a free workshop, and that's one of the things that we want to ask you to choose. If you want to do a workshop with us, we'll bring in these experts, scope out your system, then and give you a full presentation of what should be your migration, what should be the prioritization, whether you should do a part lift and shift or a part transformation, and then the tools that you want to use, the WANdisco sort of tools, and other tools as needed to fulfill on your migration vision. So that's the quick overview from our side. And here's the call to action. You got the 5 terabytes of free trial of WANdisco. You got the custom Hadoop assessment workshop from Databricks, and that's what we invite you to choose. Back to you, Tony.
Yeah, no, so I just maybe a little bit more on the 5 terabyte free trial. You can, download that immediately from our website. So I encourage you to go there and, begin to migrate data in your own environment right away without any risk. So I encourage you to try that. And like you said, the assessment, and really see why kind of the combination of Databricks plus WANdisco provides this fastest path to cloud analytics. And I don't know if there's some questions or anything that may have come in, but or if we have time, we can cover that. But that's the presentation.
Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Anand. We do have a few questions from the audience. So the first question is, what are some important steps a company needs to make prior to migrating to the cloud?
I think the first thing that we look for is some kind of a mandate, some kind of a clarity of vision to actually move from on-prem to the cloud. And you then have to take some very simple steps. Classify your workloads, right? So what are your higher priority workloads, and what workloads are you having complexity with, or complexity and difficulty with? Which ones are you having a hard time in terms of low SLAs, etc. Classify them in a meaningful way, and then we'll help you to do the rest. Have your set of stakeholders, identify your set of stakeholders that might be influencers and decision makers associated with your Hadoop migration, and bring them together in these workshop. Not all necessarily together, but have them available, identify them, and identify your workloads and priorities in terms of use cases, and then we can help you from there.
Yeah, and if I can just add a little bit too, I mean, completely agree on identify the workloads. I mean, I think that's one really important thing that we see in a lot of these migrations where folks are looking to, move off of their on-premise to Hadoop is they're, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier, trying this lift and shift, and where they end up trying to do everything in a big bang kind of migration, and they just take what they have and move it over, and that really doesn't work. But if you identify kind of these workloads, what are the groups, so that way you can migrate, groups of applications at a time and optimize those then for this new environment. Say with Databricks, you get much greater value and really lowering your risk, and the migration that we support allows you to kind of do that over time rather than trying to do everything at once.
Okay. Next question that we have from the audience is, in your experience, how does this influence the data strategy for your clients?
Let me take that. The data strategy overall should be driving the modernization, right? The data strategy could be of putting together your silos in one place, and this is a platform that enables your data strategy, right? So easier access for users, all the data in one place, having effective governance and security mechanisms. All of these is what data strategy is, and what we're enabling here with this combination of technologies, Databricks as a platform, WANdisco as a tool to get you there, is your next step, is your future data strategy for modern analytics.
Yeah, probably not much to add to that. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the reason why people are doing this is really to modernize their data architecture, their data strategy, and and using a combination of things. Their on-premise Hadoop environment can continue to operate while they're doing this migration and optimization. So kind of we see a lot of people maintaining a hybrid environment for a while until they're completely ready to turn everything over. But like I said, you don't need to do that with a big bang, doing it a group at a time, workloads, and then really you end up with this new modern architecture that's optimal for kind of the today's requirements.
There's another aspect of we're talking about a Hadoop migration here. The data strategy overall, the mecca of it for us is what we call the shared services platform. There's orders of maturity. Databricks now has a specific workshop with orders of maturity and where you are in the maturity spectrum of your data strategy. We have a specific advisory workshop for that, and helping you move from one level to the other, and having a single shared services platform, which really is now the power of your data and the intelligence of your company, is the ultimate level.
Perfect. And I believe that's all the questions that we have for today for you guys. So Tony, Anand, thank you again for taking the time to participate today. Our next speaker that we're going to be having join us is Justin Fear, who is the Director of Cyber Intelligence and Analytics at Darktrace. Justin, nice to meet you.
Great. Likewise. Thank you.
And feel free to take it away when you're ready.
Great. Excellent. So first disclaimer for everybody, like a good computer nerd, I've got monitors all over the place, so you might see me sometimes looking in that direction as well as down. Today, we are going to talk about how AI can augment humans, specifically closing the skills gap that I know so many of us are tired of hearing about, and really helping drive executive decision-making. So as was already stated, my name is Justin Fear, Director for Cyber Intel and Analytics. I've been with the company since startup, so almost 6.5 years now at this point. And prior to that, I worked for the United States government, specifically on counterterrorism-related cyber operations. So coming up today, let's talk about our agenda real quick. We're going to, start by looking at cybersecurity's broader implications for business. To set some context as to why cybersecurity has become really a board-level consideration, and why these implications point towards the need for not just reactive, but proactive and even AI cyber defense. So we'll talk a little bit about what Darktrace is doing, and I've got a really exciting big data project that Darktrace did over the course of many years. We're then going to discuss an overview of today's threat landscape. I think we'll all agree that it is very different in light of the global disruption we're all facing right now. And we're going to talk about some new attack vectors that we're starting to see across our entire fleet of customers. What does adopting some of these tools, like cloud and SaaS that, the wonderful folks at WANdisco just talked about, what do some of those tools, actually introduce from a risk standpoint as we accelerate our digital enterprise? There's also, an increasing advancement on the side of cyber attacks, and we're going to look at, what some of those are. What are attackers going to be thinking about in the future? Then we're going to pivot over to, the challenge and the solutions that we all face. And I'll go into a little bit more in depth about how AI is really the perfect tool for achieving some of this, especially when we're dealing with massive amounts of data. After all, this is, the big data and AI conference, so what better data set than your digital enterprise, your network traffic, your SaaS traffic, your cloud traffic, etc. And then before we finish, we'll actually look at a real world threat find. I might skip over some of these slides because this presentation would probably take normally about an hour. But if there is anything we get past a little too quick, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or at darktrace.com. So a little bit about the company. The most important thing to take away from this is we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We were founded in 2013 by, you guessed it, mathematicians, and we've got headquarters here in San Francisco and the Cambridge, UK. We are Europe's fastest growing cybersecurity company, according to Financial Times 2020, and I love saying that every time I'm in a presentation. And even more importantly, we were the first to market with an AI comprehensive defense solution, and are the first creators of cyber AI autonomous response known as Antigena. Lots of really good, paperwork and white papers on our website about that. And then, of course, we are a cloud native platform. The important stuff, some statistics. We are 1,300 plus employees and growing strong. We are going through another big growth spurt right now with 44 offices around the globe. Over 4,000 customers spread out in 110 countries. So you can see we've got a pretty decent footprint across pretty much every industry vertical you can imagine in most regions of the world at this point. So the security challenges for decision makers, and some of this might be, common sense to folks, but let's just go through it for others. So what are the implications of cybersecurity for the broader business strategy? Now, I'm sure we have had this conversation a lot, amongst yourselves, as I mentioned before, but let's dive into it a little bit more. I think most would agree that by showing stats with my financial losses that organizations have faced, it's boring. It's been done before, so I'm not going to do that for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we shouldn't focus on our fear of the consequences of a cyber attack. I have sad news for everybody. You're going to get breached at some point. We should focus instead on proactively empowering ourselves to fight back and actually detect these things within a matter of minutes and seconds and autonomously respond. Really, the reality is that the consequences of compromise have become so costly and attackers so persistent that hacking is not really truly a matter of if, but when, as I mentioned already. And a proactive approach is what allows organizations to safeguard themselves and really future-proof against future attacks. Again, as we've already seen in the earlier part of this presentation, we're moving a lot of our infrastructure off-site. We're adopting new technologies. And so the landscape has changed, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but so have the blind spots increased, and attackers are wreaking havoc on that. The second is, I don't think that it helps to list stats about financial loss, specifically because the most serious consequences of a cyber attack sometimes aren't even measurable by a financial loss. For instance, damage to reputation, stolen intellectual property. Some of these are so dire that they're just incalculable. So throwing stats up on the screen, I just don't think makes sense anymore in 2021. High-profile attacks are certainly still hitting headlines. We've seen just in the last 4 weeks that major supply chain attack that seems to drop another little nugget in our laps every day. And so, it's important to note, that, the erosion of public trust in business or government organizations due to these attacks comes with serious economic and social consequences. So we should want to try to get out ahead of it and not just do fear mongering as a result of it. And unfortunately, the sad truth, as I mentioned, is already, here today. So why is this? Well, we've got new legislation on board, things such as CCPA, being added to other massive regulations such as GDPR. I mentioned already reputational damage and the fines that come along with non-compliance remain a looming threat for many of today's organizations. And, we can add these to the list of all the more immediate costs like operational downtime, locked files and systems, and so on. So in other words, let's just kind of rehash this. Over the past decade, cybersecurity has become more really a critical consideration that can make or break an organization across both the public and the private sectors. And we've seen that more so because of the global disruption we are all facing right now. Data really has become the lifeblood of our organization, and we need to secure it more so than ever. So what's the big picture? Yeah, cyber incidents can clearly have consequences, and they can outreach the immediate costs of compromised or non-operational systems. But at the same time, board-level executives are grappling with that ongoing challenge of translating technical insights into meaningful decision-making. And this is where I think AI is a perfect tool for board-level decision-makings. I often hear executives tell me that they struggle to strike that perfect balance between mitigating technical risks and really accelerating digital transformation, all while maintaining that high level of innovation across the enterprise and, and maintaining that competitive edge that we all strive for. And so in today's chaotic and high stakes world, security teams and executives both really need to separate the signal from the noise. And when it comes to dealing with unpredictability and perceiving patterns and clusters of behavior that the human eye simply cannot see, self-learning AI tools are already available there to help you with that, for instance, like Darktrace. So let's talk about some interesting finds out of a Forrester report that we had commissioned. So, today's threat landscape is, certainly, very different. And as many of you have likely experienced as yourselves, the global disruption has brought about really an interesting time, and it's motivated a lot of organizations to embrace digital acceleration. Now, digital transformation was the big buzzword we were all talking about before all this happened. And when the pandemic hit and all of our employees literally were told to stay home overnight, those digital transformation projects that were slated to take 14 months, maybe longer, had to be done in some cases less than a few weeks or even days. And so what happens when you move at speed? You tend to overlook things like security, or you make mistakes. And so that is one of the prime things we're seeing across most of our customer base. It's not necessarily that all of those fascinating technologies that WANdisco talked about are insecure. That's not the case at all. It's that we are moving so quickly that in many cases our own teams are not spun up or have enough expertise to spin these things up and are learning on the job. And that is when a lot of these things happen. Let's talk about a couple of numbers out of this Forrester report that I found to be absolutely shocking. And we'll go into some even more shocking ones after this, but I'm just going to read a quote here. Our infrastructure has expanded and diversified in the last 5 years in a way that makes developing a resilient and unified security strategy more difficult and complex. Look at how many folks agreed and disagreed with that. We're pretty split down the middle. Security threats have gotten faster in the last 5 years. This is a pretty easy one, drastically reducing time to impact. I still would like to see, a little bit more on the strongly agree side there, but it would be what you expect. And then the volume of advanced security threats has increased in the last 5 years. You'd think this is a no-brainer. I would expect everybody to be in the strongly agree camp, but I think we're going to continue to see that number grow. And so this is really kind of shocking that, we're not a little bit further along than we need to be from a posture standpoint. So security response, and I'm going to kind of just go into the hard facts on this one. Focus all your energy on the blue box on the right corner of your screen, and let's just talk about that for a second. On average, how long does each of these stages take your security team to triage an incident? Now, remember what we just said in the last screen. The number of incidents is increasing exponentially because we're introducing all these new things and these new complexities into our environment. And so we looked at how long it takes on average to go through the following stages of triaging an incident. And look at this, discovery, we should all be in the less than an hour. But the problem is we're still way beyond that. I told you before, we need to be talking in terms of minutes and seconds. Investigation is even worse. I want to see more of that going into that dark blue, less than an hour range. And then I can't even believe folks are still in the more than one day. But those folks are going to learn the hard way. And then recovery, that is not what you want to see. We want to see recovery in less than an hour. As I've already mentioned, some of you are in industry verticals right now where just an hour of downtime can cost millions, if not cripple your entire business. So how is it that we can only be at 5%, in recovery phase of less than an hour? We need to get these numbers further over to the left and down in terms of seconds and milliseconds. And that is where AI is such a powerful tool for this. So we already mentioned before, attacks are accelerating. Our networks are getting more complex, not getting simpler. And to make matters worse, we're still understaffed. How many of us have sat through briefings? I talk to the press a lot. Reporters are always asking me, is there still a skills shortage? The answer is, yeah, there still is. If I had to give anybody advice about a career path to go into, it would be a combination of big data and cybersecurity. We still need more folks, and I don't see that problem, being solved anytime soon. Except I'm going to show you how we actually tackled it a couple of years ago. But this is where AI is the perfect tool to do that, doing what the humans can't possibly do because we don't have the compute power, pulling out patterns out of massive data sets that might be changing thousands of times per second. This is what AI was designed for. And so discovery, investigation, eradication, all of those phases, often take hours and days, as I've already mentioned, and that's just not feasible anymore, especially when you start looking at critical national infrastructure. We saw just in the last 48 hours, something here in the United States. I won't call it an attack because there's new reporting coming out, but a security incident at a water treatment plant. And could you imagine if they had come out and said it took us days? By the time that they would have found it, if it had taken days, that water supply might have already gotten to, consumers and put people in the hospital. So we don't have the luxury of days anymore. We need to be talking in hours and minutes. And then, of course, your AI can do a lot of things. It can augment the humans. It can automate the investigations and the triage. It can automate the detection piece. That's easy. That's what put Darktrace on the map. And then, of course, response. It's not enough for me to tell you in a matter of a second that there's strange stuff happening on the network. I got to respond. I got to do something to at least buy the humans time. And this is what we found when we first started providing our customers with that cutting edge detection engine, that spots all these weird things. They all said, you're finding all this fascinating stuff, but I don't have people to actually do anything. And so we built this autonomous response engine that actually takes surgical response based off of the inputs that it got from the detection engine. So AI can be used across all facets of the triage of an incident, from discovery, investigation, eradication, all the way down to recovery. And I have no doubt that if more of us adopted this mindset, we could get those numbers into the dark blue and shift the pendulum a little bit more in the direction in our favor. So how can we augment humans? I pulled this one out because I mentioned before, Darktrace has a lot of fascinating math-based, AI-based, machine learning-based projects and tools that we, have developed. But I am not going to be a salesperson today, and I'm not going to sell you on anything. What I want to share with you is how we tried to tackle the problem of the skill shortage. I've told you before, I'm tired of talking to reporters talking about that number going up every year about how there's less of us to go around to actually do the job. And so Darktrace said, let's try to tackle this from a math standpoint or using AI, obviously. And so what we did is, like all things machine learning, we needed data. And as this conference is called, we needed a big data set. We needed a lot of good data. And so what we did is we watched myself, as well as my colleagues. I have 100+ colleagues around the globe. And what we did is we watched how our analytical team works. And it's from watching them for about 3.5 years, and we're still currently watching and training our system. We were able to form a data set that really replicates and shows the human question and answer thought process. So first and foremost, let's define what is it to be a human analyst? Well, a human analyst is a storyteller. They interrogate the data and they ask questions of the data and they form a hypothesis. It's that question and answer thought process that we were able to pull out of the data set, that pattern we were able to pull out, and using supervised machine learning, train our AI analyst. Now, the AI analyst is different for everybody because it's based on the inputs it's receiving. So the AI analyst is working on all 4,000 of our clients, and it's looking at all the incidents and it's stringing them together, and it's saying, I think this weird activity that happened on Monday is mathematically related to the stuff that happened on Wednesday and Saturday. And I'm going to go ahead and write a full report for you, triage it, translate it in 9 different languages, and I am going to produce that for you. There is a great blog post on our website about how we caught APT41, which is China, with no human intervention whatsoever. It mapped out every step of the attacker and wrote a nice, easy-to-read report. So go check that out on our website. For the sake of time, I want to just jump into what that actually looks like. And these are real-live screenshots from the AI analyst. If you're not familiar, Lashif is a ransomware strain. And just a couple fun facts about it. It's low level, first observed in 2016. It's normally run manually. So there is a live person on the other end on the keyboard actually working on the compromised system. It's not a double threat, meaning they're only looking for file encryption. They're not looking to exfil the data and hold your data ransom as well as your devices. It uses a lot of live off the land techniques. So software you're already familiar with, which helps it hide and blend in with the noise. RDP brute force against exposed servers. We've seen a massive increase in this. RDP is the lifeblood of remote work. And I would recommend to everybody on this call, go back and double check. Make sure you don't have any of that exposed to the internet. It is being exploited. And there are removal and recovery tools available online. What does this attack look like? So here is all 5 of the components. We saw here in the time frame, June 10th, June 21st at 10 p.m. UTC. We actually saw a script download, Mimikatz PowerShell script. This is used to actually find credentials in a compromised system. Very well known. You can Google it. Lots of intel about it. From there, we later saw, on the same day, a few hours later, multiple admin credentials being used. And this is lateral movement, as you would expect. We saw additional internal recon. We're following that attack phase framework we're all familiar with. And we saw this in the form of unusual network scans from a domain controller. Notice the term unusual is going to be used a lot here. That domain controller had never done scanning before. So that is a red flag. Next, we saw more lateral movement in the form of PowerShell, PS-exec, and service control commands. And then finally, we saw the encryption in the form of the Lashif ransom note, being written to, file shares. So we've mapped it out, but what would it actually look like? This is what anomaly detection looks like when you get compromised. And in our business, we call this the proverbial lighting up like a Christmas tree. There is clearly something unusual happening on this device, and every one of those dots is an anomaly that's been detected using Darktrace's unsupervised machine learning. We had no rules and signatures. We had no predefined knowledge of what's good or bad, only what is unusual or usual for this environment. And because we knew that this device never acts in this way, we were very easily able to spot the abnormality. Now, this is the exciting part. What you see in front of you is an AI analyst report. And so very quickly, we can notice a nice timeline of events, which if you ask any analyst, can sometimes take the most time to actually develop. Next, you see in red there all the different components of that event that I just listed for you. And each one of those is a tab. Each tab will expose a nice, easy to read summary, the list of the model breaches, and then over on the right side is those question and answers. So if I was the human analyst analyzing this, these are the questions I'd be asking. So it has now saved me hours of time not having to take notes, not having to rely on other data sources, not having to right click here and right click there and copy into a notepad and form a report. It's done all of it for me. And in this case, all our client had to do was come in the morning, hit the download report button. They had a briefing to give to upper management, and they were able to very quickly within the first 10 minutes of their day, establish an after action or a cleanup report and determine what it was going to cost to get them back online. And so before we move on to question and answers, I hope that that really shows you the power of how AI can be used to not just detect and respond, but even automate the investigation. Last but not least, I mentioned there's a lot of really good resources on the Darktrace website, www.darktrace.com. Here is a couple. There's a Cyber AI Analyst white paper. There's that even more detail about that Lashif ransomware case I just showed you guys. There's a fabulous video about the Cyber AI Analyst. It might even be me narrating it. I'm not sure. And then there's a wonderful article in my favorite magazine, Wired Magazine, mimicking the cybersecurity and analysts' intuition with AI. With that, I would just leave you with a couple quotes. If you're a car nut like me, if you followed Formula One, yes, that is our name on the back, fin of the McLaren Formula One race team. And you can see here a couple quotes from some of our longtime customers about how they're using AI and what it's brought to their team. So with that, I will take a few questions from the audience.
Thank you, Justin. Great presentation. We do have a few questions from the audience. So the first one is, how can you trust the AI when there's already a compromise in the network?
Yep, this wouldn't be a briefing if we didn't get that question. It gets asked every single time. So plain and simple, it's a yes and no answer. I'm going to give you the politician's answer. Essentially, sure, if you're compromised, and let's just say your compromised device is beaconing out to an Eastern European nation at a pretty regular base, we're going to alert you to that. Just like that other note, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree. But let's say you ignored that and it did get learned over time. Most things will take a considerable amount of time to get learned to the point where they drop down mathematically so low that they're not reported. Even if that was ignored for so long, what would happen was we would actually fire on all those other aspects of an attack. An attack is made up of so many different pieces. So we'd still see the C2 communication, we'd still see the exfiltration, we'd see payload, lateral movement, etc. So even if something was to get learned, we would still spot it in all the other dimensions that we're focusing on.
The second question is, how long does it take the AI to learn normal before you can trust it?
Absolutely. So in the very early days, it took a little while, as with anything. And our mathematicians worked tirelessly to really, tweak the algorithms and, tune them. And right now it takes us about 7 to 8 days for that initial baseline. And I don't love the term baseline because that implies that we stop learning. After day 8, we've got enough data that the math can start to bubble up some of those unusual anomalies happening in the environment. And then we're still learning. We're still changing our calculations based on the inputs. We're growing, we're shrinking, we're moving with the network. So everything from day 0 to day 7, we're still just network monitoring. Everything's so new. But after day 8 is when really things start to come alive.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how do you threshold the false positive and false negative attacks?
Yeah, so, false positive is really a term that I think needs to be altered a little bit or redefined. False positive was a great term when we're living in a rules and signatures world, but we're not anymore. In the case of anomaly detection, if you actually find it and it pops up on your screen, it's a positive. It is truly anomalous. The reason I think we focus on false positive so much is we have to remind ourselves anomaly detection engines are here to tell us the difference between unusual and usual, not the difference between good or bad. I don't know what good or bad is. A lot of times the unusual can turn out to be very bad, but we are here to tell you the difference between unusual and usual. So there is really no such thing as false positive. There's more of how many of those unusual positives actually meet a threshold for my environment to dedicate human resources. And we've actually built in some other tools in the environment to help tune that as well. So you're not just inundated with all the unusual things happening in your environment.
Perfect. We do have time for one more question, and that is, I already have a firewall that is live updated with the latest blacklisted domains 24/7. Why would I need to rely on AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to, mention the wonderful presentation by WANdisco earlier again. With the advent of things like cloud and SaaS and all these other platforms, what that gives us is speed. As they so eloquently, pointed out, we can move at an amazing speed, migrating massive amounts of data, standing up entire virtual networks, moving our entire on-prem infrastructure over in a short period of time. Well, guess what? That means the attackers can do the same. So here's a fun fact. I can register a domain, I can build attack infrastructure, carry out an operation, and actually burn my entire infrastructure within a matter of minutes. And all of that could be automated with a couple lines of Python code. And unfortunately, because of that speed, we simply can't rely on whitelists. By the time those lists get to us, whether it's in the form of threat intelligence or updated real-time whitelists, oftentimes it's too late and it's stale data. I'm not saying it's bad data. It's still a good data source for retroactive investigations, but it's not something we can rely on from a real-time perspective.
Okay, and we did have a one more entry, if you don't mind, one more question was asked. How can we employ AI in dynamic signature-based detection attacks?
Yeah, and so unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to go into it, but I would implore you to definitely go check out the Darktrace website. This is why we designed our system utilizing unsupervised machine learning as opposed to supervised machine learning, which most of the industry is still using. Unsupervised machine learning means I'm not using that any sort of training set. I'm training off of your environment. And so because of that, I don't need to rely on any signatures. It doesn't matter how dynamic those signatures are. We are not going to use any signatures or rules. We are purely going to use the anomaly detection, the difference between unusual and usual in the environment. What that means in a nutshell is I will find WannaCry version 5.x that might not even be deployed until 3 years from now, utilizing the same technique that we use today, because I don't need to rely on any of those antiquated rules and signatures.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin, for taking the time to present today. Thank you to all of our speakers that participated today. And thank you to all the attendees that joined us. That's going to wrap up our session for today, but please look forward to our next follow-up series, which will be happening on the 25th of February. We've got some really exciting speakers for that as well, so you don't want to miss out. So be on the lookout for registration for that. Other than that, thank you again for participating, and we'll see you guys in the near future.